Jang Dong-soo stood in the doorway of a Chicago homeless shelter, staring at a young woman scrubbing floors in donated clothes. She had no idea who he was. She had no idea that for 18 years he had sent $10 million to ensure she never wanted for anything. But here she was, sleeping on a cot, eating from a soup kitchen, wearing shoes with holes in them. The woman who was supposed to care for her had just one question to answer. Where is every single dollar I sent? And when Dong-soo asked that question 3 days later, with his men standing behind him and bank statements spread across the table, the color drained from her face so fast she looked like a ghost. This is about a grandfather who built an empire in the shadows, a granddaughter who survived on scraps, and the aunt who stole a fortune while a child starved. Before we continue, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Stories like this don't just need to be heard, they need to be remembered. Jang Dong-soo wasn't your typical grandfather. At 68 years old, he ran one of the most powerful crime organizations in South Korea. His network stretched from Seoul to Los Angeles, from Tokyo to Chicago. He controlled shipping routes, protection rackets, and had politicians and judges on his payroll. People whispered his name with respect and fear. He had built this empire from nothing, starting as a street enforcer in Busan and clawing his way to the top through intelligence, ruthlessness, and an ironclad code of loyalty. By 50, Dong-soo was untouchable. He lived in a fortress-like compound in Gangnam, surrounded by armed guards. He wore custom suits that cost more than most people's cars. But all that power meant nothing when his daughter died. Park Min-ji had been Dong-soo's only child. He had kept her far away from his business, sent her to international schools, paid for her medical degree. Min-ji became a pediatric surgeon at Seoul National University Hospital. She married David Okonkwo, a Nigerian-Korean cardiologist. They were happy, building a life with nothing to do with Dong-soo's world of violence and shadows. When Min-ji got pregnant, Dong-soo felt hope for the first time in decades. But then David was killed. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit his car head-on. Min-ji was 6 months pregnant, and the grief nearly destroyed her. Dong-soo watched his daughter crumble. He offered to handle the driver his way, but Min-ji refused. She was still a good person, still believed in the system, even when that system gave her husband's killer only 3 years in prison. Min-ji held on for the baby. She gave birth to a healthy baby girl in August 2006. She named her Eniola, honoring David's Nigerian heritage. The name meant wealth, and Min-ji wanted her daughter to be rich in all the ways that mattered: love, opportunity, freedom. But Min-ji never got to see her daughter grow up. Complications from childbirth turned fatal. An infection the doctors missed. Min-ji died 3 days after giving birth, holding her daughter's tiny hand and making Dong-soo promise to keep Eniola safe. Dong-soo kept that promise the only way he knew how, with money and distance. He was 50 years old, running a criminal empire that required constant attention. He had enemies who would use a baby against him without hesitation. How could he raise an infant in that world? That's when David's sister reached out. Grace Okonkwo had flown in from Chicago for the funerals. She was a nurse, married with 2 children, living in a nice neighborhood on Chicago's north side. She offered to take Eniola, to raise her as her own, to give the baby the stable, normal life that Min-ji had wanted. Grace seemed genuine, kind, devastated by the losses. Her husband, Marcus, was a high school teacher. Their 2 kids, Jessica and Tyler, were 8 and 10. They had a 3-bedroom house, a yard, a good school district. It seemed perfect. Dong-soo made the arrangement through his lawyers. He would send $50,000 per month, deposited into an account in Eniola's name, but managed by Grace as legal guardian. Over 18 years, that would total more than $10 million. Money for the best schools, health care, college tuition, whatever Eniola needed. Grace signed the papers. She promised to send photos and updates, but Grace suggested that visits might be difficult. Eniola should feel settled, she said. Let her be a normal American kid. When she's older, we can arrange visits. Dong-soo, drowning in grief and guilt, agreed. For 18 years, Dong-soo sent that money, every single month. $50,000 transferred like clockwork. He never missed a payment. Grace sent occasional photos in the early years, Eniola as a toddler, Eniola starting kindergarten, but the updates became less frequent. By the time Eniola was 10, Dong-soo was getting maybe one photo a year. By 15, nothing at all. When he called, Grace always had excuses. Eniola was busy with school. We'll send photos soon, she promised, every single time. Dong-soo told himself this was normal. American teenagers were busy. He told himself the money was enough. But then, in November 2024, Dong-soo's accountant noticed something odd. The account where he deposited Eniola's monthly funds had been closed and reopened 3 times over the years. Dong-soo ordered a full audit. What they found made his blood run cold. The money was being deposited correctly, yes, but then it was being transferred out immediately. Every single month for 18 years, $50,000 went in and $50,000 went out to various accounts in Grace's name. Some went to mortgage payments on a house worth $1.2 million. Some went to private school tuition, but not for Eniola, for Jessica and Tyler. Some went to luxury car payments, vacation homes, country club memberships. Grace had been living like a millionaire on Eniola's money. Dong-soo sat in his office in Seoul, looking at spreadsheets that detailed 18 years of theft. Over $10 million stolen from a child. The rage that filled Dong-soo was unlike anything he'd felt in years. He had killed men for stealing far less, but this was his granddaughter. Was Min-ji's daughter. This was the one person in the world he was supposed to protect, and he had failed her. Dong-soo called his most trusted lieutenant, Kim Tae-hyun, who ran their operations in the United States. "Find my granddaughter," Dong-soo said, his voice cold and controlled. "Find Eniola. I want to know where she is, how she's living, what Grace has done to her. Within 48 hours. Tae-hyun made calls. Within hours, private investigators were on the ground in Chicago. They started at the $1.2 million house in Lincoln Park. They watched Grace come and go in her BMW. They saw Jessica and Tyler, both in their 20s now, both driving expensive cars and wearing designer clothes. But there was no sign of Eniola. The investigators dug deeper. One neighbor remembered a quiet girl who used to live with the family years ago. "I think they sent her to boarding school," the neighbor said. But there were no records of Eniola at any boarding school, no enrollment records at any private school in Chicago. In fact, there were no educational records for Eniola at all after elementary school. Then one investigator checked homeless shelters. He struck gold at a place called Mercy House on Chicago's South Side. The director, Mrs. Adebayo, remembered Eniola immediately. "Sweet girl," she said, "came to us about 4 months ago. No ID, no money, no family. Said she'd been thrown out when she turned 18. She works in our kitchen to earn her meals and her bed." The investigator's photos arrived on Dong-soo's phone at 3 a.m. Seoul time. He opened the files and felt his heart stop. A young woman with rich brown skin and thick natural hair. She had Min-ji's eyes, David's strong jawline. She wore donated clothes, clearly too big, with worn-out shoes and no coat, despite Chicago's November cold. Another photo showed her sleeping on a narrow cot in a room full of other women. Another showed her washing dishes in an industrial kitchen, her hands red and raw. Dong-soo stared at those photos for an hour. This was his granddaughter, Min-ji's daughter, the child he had sent $10 million to protect. And she was homeless, working for her next meal, abandoned. By 6 a.m., Dong-soo was on his private plane to Chicago.
The 13-hour flight felt like an eternity. He kept looking at those photos, kept thinking about all the years he had wasted, all the birthdays he had missed. Min-ji had asked him to keep Eniola safe, and he had failed. They landed at O'Hare on a gray November afternoon. Mercy House looked like what it was, a converted church building in a neighborhood that had seen better days. Inside, Dong-soo found it clean and warm. Mrs. Adebayo met them at the door. She was Nigerian, probably in her 60s, with kind eyes that missed nothing. She looked at Dong-soo and his men in their expensive coats and immediately became protective. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for Eniola," Dong-soo said.
"She told me her grandfather is dead," Mrs. Adebayo said carefully. "She told me she has no family." "I am her grandfather," Dong-soo said, "and I am very much alive." Mrs. Adebayo studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "She's in the kitchen, but you need to understand something. That girl has been through hell. She doesn't trust anyone. If you're here to hurt her, you'll have to go through me first." "I'm here to bring her home," Dong-soo said quietly. "I'm here to fix what I should have fixed 18 years ago." Mrs. Adebayo led them through a narrow hallway to the kitchen, and there, with her hands in soapy water, washing pots and pans, was Eniola. She was tall, maybe 5'8", with her mother's elegant features and her father's strong build. Her hair was pulled back in a simple style. She wore no jewelry, no makeup, but even in these circumstances, she carried herself with dignity. "Eniola," Mrs. Adebayo called gently, "can you come here for a minute, sweetheart?" Eniola dried her hands and turned around. When she saw Dong-soo and his men standing there in their expensive suits, confusion crossed her face. She walked over cautiously. "Yes, ma'am?" she said softly. Her voice carried a slight Chicago accent, thoroughly American. Up close, Dong-soo could see Min-ji even more clearly, the shape of her face, the way she held her head, the cautious intelligence in her dark eyes. "Do you know who I am?" Dong-soo asked, his voice barely steady. Eniola studied his face, taking in his Asian features, his expensive clothes, the men standing protectively behind him. She shook her head slowly. "No, sir. Should I?" The words hit Dong-soo like bullets. "I am Jang Dong-soo. I am your grandfather. Your mother was my daughter, Park Min-ji." Eniola's expression shifted. Confusion became disbelief, then something harder. "That's impossible," she said, taking a step back. "Aunt Grace told me my grandfather died years ago. She said he was a criminal who wanted nothing to do with me after my mom died. She said I was a burden nobody wanted." Dong-soo felt rage and grief war inside him. Every word Grace had told Eniola was a lie designed to isolate her, to keep her from reaching out, to maintain complete control. "That is not true," Dong-soo said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I have sent money for you every month since you were born. $50,000 every single month for 18 years. Over $10 million total."
Eniola stared at him like he was speaking another language. "What money?" she whispered. "I've never had any money. I don't even have a bank account. I don't have a birth certificate or a social security card. Aunt Grace never gave me anything." Tae-hyun stepped forward and handed Dong-soo a tablet. On it were bank statements, years and years of transfers. Every month, $50,000 deposited into an account in Eniola Okonkwo's name. Every month, that same $50,000 transferred out to Grace's personal accounts within 24 hours. Eniola's hands shook as she looked at the screen. "This says over $10 million, Eniola said, her voice breaking. "Where is it? Why am I here? Why do I have nothing?" "That is what I intend to find out," Dong-soo said, "and the person who stole your future is going to answer for every day you suffered."
The next hours were difficult. Eniola didn't trust easily. 18 years of Grace's lies and neglect had taught her that adults were dangerous, that promises meant nothing. But Mrs. Adebayo sat down with Eniola and spoke to her in Yoruba, the language of her father's people. Whatever she said helped, because Eniola finally nodded and agreed to go with Dong-su. She gathered her few belongings from the shelter, a backpack with 2 changes of clothes, a worn book about nursing that she'd found at a library sale, and a single photograph of a beautiful woman with kind eyes. "Your mother," Dong-su said softly, recognizing Min-ji immediately. "Aunt Grace gave it to me when she kicked me out. It was the only thing she gave me." They drove to Dong-su's hotel, the Peninsula Chicago on Michigan Avenue. Eniola sat in the back of the SUV, staring out at the city. The hotel suite occupied an entire floor, with views of Lake Michigan and the city skyline. Eniola walked in and seemed to shrink, as if afraid to touch anything. Taehyun's wife, Sun-hee, was waiting. She showed Eniola to a bedroom larger than any space Grace had kept her in. She ran a bath with expensive salts. She laid out soft towels and clothes that would actually fit. While Eniola cleaned up, Dong-su made calls. First, to his forensic accountant in Seoul. "I need you to trace every penny of $10 million, Dong-su said, within 3 days. Second call went to his attorney in Chicago. "I need you to prepare criminal charges, embezzlement, fraud, identity theft, child endangerment, everything that will stick. The target is Grace Okonkwo." Third call was the one he had been dreading. He dialed Grace's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and fake. "Mr. Jang, what a surprise. Is everything okay?" "I found Eniola," Dong-su said, his voice colder than a Seoul winter. There was a pause, just a fraction too long. "What do you mean?" Grace said, trying to sound confused. "Eniola is right here at home."
"Stop lying," Dong-su said. "I found her in a homeless shelter. I found her washing dishes for her next meal. So I'm going to ask you one time, Grace. Where is the $10 million I sent for my granddaughter?" Another pause, longer this time. When Grace spoke again, the fake warmth was gone. "I don't know what she told you, but I took care of that girl. She had a roof, she had food, the money was used appropriately." "Then you won't have any problem providing documentation," Dong-su said. "Bank statements, receipts, school records, medical bills. I want proof of how you spent every dollar. My attorney will be in contact within the hour." He hung up before she could respond. That night, Dong-su couldn't sleep. He kept checking on Eniola, watching her sleep fitfully in the comfortable bed. Around 2 a.m., he found her sitting in the dark living room, staring out at the city lights. "Can't sleep?" he asked gently, sitting in a chair across from her. Eniola shook her head. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up back at the shelter, that this is some kind of trick." "It's real," Dong-su promised, "and you're never going back there. You're never going to be hungry or cold or alone again." Eniola was quiet for a long time. "She told me you were dead, Aunt Grace. She said you died when I was little. She said you were involved in bad things and got killed. She said even when you were alive, you didn't want me. You blamed me for my mom's death." Every word was another knife in Dong-su's chest. "Your mother died because of a medical complication," he said firmly. "Not because of you. Never because of you. I loved Min-ji more than anything in this world, and when she died, I failed her by failing you. I trusted the wrong person. I thought money was enough. I was a coward who hid behind excuses instead of being the grandfather you deserved." Eniola looked at him with those eyes that were so much like Min-ji's. Why didn't you visit? Why didn't you check on me even once in 18 years? Because I was afraid, Dong-su admitted. Afraid that my life, my business, my enemies would hurt you. Your mother spent her whole life trying to stay away from my world. When she died, I thought the best thing I could do was give you the same chance. Keep you far away from me, from Korea, from everything I am. Grace made it sound so right. She said visits would confuse you, that you needed stability, and I believed her because it was easier than facing my own pain. But you sent money, Eniola said, every month, for 18 years. I never stopped, Dong-su said, never missed a payment. I thought I was taking care of you. Instead, I was funding Grace's comfortable life while you suffered. Over the next days, the forensic accountant worked her magic. What she uncovered was worse than Dong-su had imagined. Grace had been stealing from Eniola from day one. The house in Lincoln Park, purchased for $1.2 million when Eniola was 5, paid entirely with Eniola's money. 2 luxury cars, a BMW and a Tesla, both bought with Eniola's money. Private school tuition for Jessica and Tyler, $45,000 per year each, paid with Eniola's money. Annual family vacations to Nigeria, staying in 5-star hotels, all on Eniola's money. Designer clothes, jewelry, country club memberships, a vacation condo in Florida, all of it stolen from a child.
But the cruelty went deeper than just financial theft. Grace had kept Eniola isolated in a small apartment on the west side, far from the Lincoln Park mansion. She had homeschooled Eniola, but not to provide quality education. It was about control. It kept Eniola from making friends who might ask questions. It kept her from teachers who might notice neglect. Grace provided the bare minimum, enough food to survive, a place to sleep, basic clothes. But there was no love, no encouragement, no investment in Eniola's future. And when Eniola turned 18 in August, Grace simply threw her out, told her to leave and figure out her own life, gave her that single photo of Minji and nothing else. No birth certificate, no social security card, no money, no support, just abandonment. Eniola had spent the first month sleeping in parks and 24-hour restaurants. She had eventually found Mercy House, where Mrs. Adebayo recognized something special in the quiet, polite young woman who asked for nothing but was willing to work for everything. Eniola had been studying for her GED during the day and working in the kitchen at night. She dreamed of becoming a nurse like her mother, but without resources, those dreams seemed impossible. Now living in Dong-su's hotel suite, Eniola was slowly learning what it meant to be cared for. Soon he made sure she ate regular meals. Dong-su spent hours showing her photos and videos of Minji. Eniola watched everything with hungry eyes, absorbing details about the mother she had been denied. Dong-su told her about Minji's childhood in Seoul, her brilliance in school, her decision to become a doctor, her joy when she married David. 1 week after finding Eniola, Dong-su decided it was time to confront Grace. His lawyers advised against it, but Dong-su needed to look her in the eye. He needed to understand how someone could be so cruel to an innocent child. He told Eniola she didn't have to come, but Eniola insisted. "She stole my life, grandfather. I deserve to be there." They drove to the Lincoln Park mansion on a cold Saturday morning. The house sat on a tree-lined street where properties cost millions. Dong-su's men had been watching the house for days. Grace was home, so were Jessica and Tyler. Dong-su rang the doorbell. His men stood behind him, their presence quietly threatening. Eniola stood at Dong-su's side, no longer the discarded girl in donated clothes, but a young woman in a proper coat and boots, standing tall. Grace opened the door. She had clearly expected a delivery or maybe a neighbor. Instead, she found herself staring at Jang Dong-su. Then she saw Eniola, and the blood drained from her face so fast she swayed on her feet. "Hello, Grace," Dong-su said with deadly courtesy. "I think we need to talk."
Grace tried to close the door, but Dong-Su's man was already moving forward, his hand preventing it from shutting. "Mrs. Okonkwo," Robert Chen said, stepping forward, "I'm Mr. Jiang's attorney. You can speak with us now, or you can speak with federal investigators. Your choice." They ended up in Grace's living room, a space filled with expensive furniture and artwork. Everything in this room had been purchased with stolen money. Grace sat on the edge of a designer sofa, her hands twisting in her lap. She kept glancing at Eniola as if she couldn't believe the girl had found her way back. Dong-Su placed the folder of financial records on the coffee table with controlled force. $10 million, he said quietly. 18 years of monthly deposits. Every penny I sent to ensure my granddaughter had the life she deserved. Where is it, Grace? Grace's face had gone gray. Her hands trembled. "I used it for Eniola," she said, but the lie was weak. "Did you?" Dong-Su leaned forward, "because my investigators tell a different story. They tell me you bought this house, those cars outside, sent your own children to private schools, took vacations every summer, all while my granddaughter wore donated clothes and slept in a homeless shelter. I gave her a place to live. I fed her for 18 years. That counts for something." Eniola spoke, her voice steady despite the emotion underneath. "You kept me locked in a tiny apartment. You homeschooled me so I couldn't tell anyone how you treated me. You gave me leftovers and hand-me-downs. You never let me go anywhere except the grocery store. And when I turned 18, you threw me out with nothing. You told me to figure out my own life because you were done with me." Grace's mask cracked. Her eyes flashed with anger. "You ungrateful girl. I took you in when nobody wanted you. I raised you when your grandfather was too busy being a criminal to care." "That's a lie," Dong-Su said, his voice rising. "I called every month. I asked about her. You told me she was fine, that she was happy, that visits would upset her." "And you believed me," Grace shot back. "You never demanded proof. You never insisted on seeing her. You gave money at the problem and called it love." The words stung because they held truth, but that didn't excuse what Grace had done.
"You're right," Dong-Su said quietly. "I failed Eniola. I will live with that guilt forever. But you deliberately stole from a child. You isolated her, neglected her, threw her away. Why, Grace? Why would you do this?" Something broke in Grace's face. Years of lies collapsed. "Because she had everything," Grace said, her voice venomous. "Beautiful Minji with her perfect life. David loved her more than he ever loved his own family. She got the education, the career, the fairy tale. Then she died and left this baby. And suddenly, everyone cared. You sent millions, more money than I had ever seen. And I thought, why should this child have everything when my children had nothing?" "So you stole from an infant?" Dong-Su said. "You saw a helpless baby and decided to use her. Where is every dollar, Grace? I want to know." Grace's face was splotchy now, tears of rage and self-pity running down. "The house, the cars, the schools, the trips, it's all there in your papers. I used it to give my children the life they deserved. And my granddaughter?" Dong-Su's voice was ice. "What did she deserve?" Grace said nothing. Robert Chen made a call. Within 20 minutes, FBI agents arrived. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements, forged documents, testimony from neighbors who rarely saw Eniola. Grace was arrested on federal charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, and child endangerment. As agents led her out in handcuffs, Jessica and Tyler appeared at the top of the stairs. They watched in shock as their mother was taken away. They had lived well, never wanted for anything, and had no idea it was built on their cousin's suffering. The trial came fast because the evidence was ironclad. Financial experts testified about the systematic theft. Mrs. Adebayo testified about Eniola's condition when she arrived at the shelter, and Eniola testified. She sat in that courtroom and told her story with quiet strength. She explained the years of isolation, the minimal care, the lies about Dong-Su. She described being abandoned with nothing on her 18th birthday.
The jury deliberated less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Grace to 15 years in federal prison and ordered full restitution of $10 million plus interest and damages. Her assets were seized, the house, the cars, everything bought with stolen money. The recovered funds went into a new trust for Eniola, this time with proper oversight. 6 months passed. Eniola enrolled at Northwestern University studying social work. She wanted to help others who had aged out of foster care or faced homelessness. She lived with Dong-soo, who had decided to split his time between Seoul and Chicago. They built the relationship they should have had all along. Dong-soo taught her about business, about her mother, about the family history. He introduced her to relatives in Korea who welcomed her with open arms. Eniola learned about her heritage, both Korean and Nigerian. She visited Seoul and Lagos, discovering roots she never knew existed. And Dong-soo learned about Eniola, her intelligence, her compassion, her quiet humor. She loved art and spicy food and old movies. She was brilliant, but also learning to relax, to trust that she didn't have to earn every meal.
One Saturday, Eniola asked Dong-soo to drive her somewhere. They ended up back at Mercy House. Mrs. Adebayo greeted them with huge smiles. Eniola had been volunteering every weekend, helping other young women find resources. But today was special. Eniola and Dong-soo had established a scholarship fund. The Park Min-ji Second Chance Scholarship would cover full tuition, housing, and support for young women aging out of foster care or experiencing homelessness. The first 5 recipients stood nervously as Eniola presented their award letters. After the ceremony, Dong-soo and Eniola visited Min-ji's grave in a Chicago cemetery. It was the first time Eniola had been there. They placed flowers on the simple but elegant headstone. "I found her, Min-ji," Dong-soo said softly. "Our Eniola. She's everything you would have wanted. Strong, kind, brilliant. She survived hell and came through it with grace." Eniola placed her own flowers down. "Hi, Mom," she whispered. "I finally met Grandfather. I finally came home. I wish you were here, but I feel you with me every day. I promise to make you proud." That evening, back at Dong-soo's Chicago penthouse, Eniola worked on an essay for her social work class about transformative experiences. Dong-soo brought her tea the way she liked it, with honey. He kissed her head, the way his own father used to do, the way he should have been doing for 18 years. "Don't stay up too late," he said. "You have that study group in the morning." "I won't," Eniola promised. "Good night, Grandfather." "Good night, sweetheart." In her essay, Eniola wrote about survival and resilience, about the moment a stranger walked into a shelter and revealed he was her grandfather, about learning she hadn't been forgotten, about watching justice catch up to cruelty. But mostly, she wrote about hope, about learning that your worth isn't determined by how people treat you, but by who you choose to become. The essay ended with a line that became her personal motto. The money was never what mattered. It was being seen, being loved, being given the chance to become who I was meant to be. Somewhere out there are other young people like Eniola, struggling and believing they're alone. But they're not alone. Eniola made sure of that. She used her story, her education, her resources to advocate and fight, because she understood something profound. Suffering can break you or forge you stronger. Isolation can destroy you or teach you the power of connection. Eniola chose to rise. She transformed pain into purpose, trauma into testimony, survival into service. And in doing so, she honored the mother she never knew and the grandfather who found her just in time. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it. Drop a comment about what you would have done in Dong-soo's position. And subscribe because we bring you stories about real people overcoming impossible odds. Sometimes family fails you, but sometimes, when you least expect it, family finds you again. And that's when healing begins. Your worth isn't determined by who failed you. It's determined by how you rise after the fall.